I sat in my car parked across the street from what used to be our apartment. The building looked the same as it always had, warm lights glowing from windows where families were probably sitting down to dinner. 4 years ago, I married Lindsay, believing we would build that kind of life together. I trusted her completely. But tonight I was here to witness the aftermath of a choice. She made a choice that picked her family over our marriage. I had left her with an empty apartment and a single letter explaining why. What happened next would change everything for both of us. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to make a tough choice between love and self-respect. This is a story about what happens when you finally put yourself first. Lindsay and I met through mutual friends in Portland, Oregon, back when life felt simple and full of possibility. We dated for 2 years before getting married, and those early days felt effortless. Both of us had stable careers. I worked as a software engineer at a tech company downtown, and she was a marketing coordinator at a firm she genuinely enjoyed. We rented a 2-bedroom apartment in the heart of the city, walking distance from coffee shops and parks we loved exploring together on weekends. Our shared dream was straightforward: save money, be responsible, and buy our first house within 3 years. We opened a joint account for household expenses while keeping separate accounts for personal spending. Everything felt transparent and fair. On weekends, we cooked meals together, went hiking in the gorge, and talked about the future like it was something we were building brick by brick. Nothing fancy, nothing rushed. Just steady progress towards something we both wanted. Her family lived up in Seattle, about a 3-hour drive north. In the beginning, our relationship with them seemed perfectly normal. We visited for holidays and special occasions. Frank, her father, was a retired salesman who loved talking about his glory days closing deals. Diane, her mother, was a homemaker who fussed over every detail when we visited. Brian, her older brother, worked in real estate and always had some story about a massive deal he just closed. I stayed polite, made conversation, and tried to be the son-in-law they could appreciate. But I noticed something early on that made me slightly uncomfortable. Frank had this habit of talking about business opportunities, investment schemes, and get-rich-quick ideas. Every conversation somehow circled back to money and how smart people were always looking for the next big break. I nodded along but never took it seriously. I figured it was just his personality, the way some people cannot help but talk about sports or politics. It felt harmless at the time. That changed in November. Frank started calling Lindsay more frequently, sometimes twice a day. The conversations were always about the same thing: cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, the future of finance, digital gold. Lindsay began researching on her own, watching videos, reading articles, asking me questions over dinner. I was not against the idea. Cryptocurrency could be a legitimate investment if approached carefully, but the way Frank talked about it felt different. It felt less like education and more like recruitment. Thanksgiving dinner at their house in Seattle was when things shifted from uncomfortable to alarming. We sat around the table, turkey and stuffing spread out in front of us, and Frank casually brought up an investment opportunity. He said a friend of his had introduced him to something called a crypto mining pool with guaranteed returns. Brian chimed in immediately, saying he had already invested and made amazing profits in just a few weeks. The way they talked made it sound like free money, like anyone who passed on this chance was a fool. I asked a few basic questions. What company ran this operation? Where were the mining facilities located? What blockchain were they working with? Frank waved me off, saying it was all proprietary information and that I would understand once I signed the non-disclosure agreement. That was the first major red flag. Lindsay, though, seemed captivated. Her eyes lit up every time Brian mentioned his supposed profits. I could see her imagining what we could do with that kind of money. On the drive home, she asked what I thought. I told her honestly that guaranteed returns were always a red flag, that we needed to research this carefully before even considering it. She agreed but seemed disappointed that I was not more excited. That night, lying in bed, I felt a small crack forming between us. It was subtle, but it was there. 2 weeks later, I checked our joint account to review our monthly budget. My stomach dropped. $3,000 were missing. I immediately asked Lindsay about it, trying to stay calm. She hesitated, looking guilty, before admitting she had lent the money to her father. He needed help with some expenses, she said, and she did not think it was a big deal. I felt blindsided. Why had she not told me? We had agreed to discuss any major financial decisions together. Her response made my chest tighten. She said it was her family, and she did not need permission to help them. It was the first real argument we had about money, and it scared me. I explained that this was not about permission. It was about transparency, about working as a team toward our shared goals. She promised to tell me next time, but refused to promise she would ask her father to repay the loan. That night, the crack between us grew wider. December arrived, and with it came Frank himself. He showed up at our apartment, unannounced, saying he was in Portland for the day and wanted to visit. But it became clear within minutes that this was not a casual visit. He had brought his laptop and a prepared presentation. We sat at our dining table while he opened a PowerPoint and launched into a full pitch about something called Titan Crypto Mining Collective. He described it as an exclusive opportunity, a private investment pool that only accepted members through personal referrals. The minimum investment was $50,000. In return, investors would receive 15% returns per month compounded. He showed screenshots of Brian's account balance numbers that looked almost obscene. He painted a picture of early adopters getting rich, while everyone else watched from the sidelines. Then he said something that made my jaw clench. He had already told the organizers that I was interested. I kept my voice steady and asked for documentation, a white paper, legal disclosures, company registration information, anything that would show this was a legitimate operation. Frank became evasive. He said it was all proprietary and that I would need to sign a non-disclosure agreement before seeing any details. That was the second massive red flag. I politely but firmly declined, saying I needed to do my own research before committing to anything. Frank's demeanor shifted. The friendly father-in-law disappeared, replaced by someone applying pressure. He leaned forward and told me this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance, that people like us never got opportunities like this. I held my ground. I said I appreciated him thinking of us, but I could not invest in something I did not fully understand. He left shortly after, clearly frustrated. Lindsay walked him to the door, and I heard them speaking in low voices before he drove away. That week, I dedicated every spare moment to researching Titan Crypto. I searched for their website and found only a cheap landing page with stock photos and vague promises. No company address, no team information, no regulatory filings. I went to Reddit and found threads warning about similar schemes. People described losing their savings to operations that looked exactly like this. The pattern was always the same. Early investors got paid using money from new investors, creating the illusion of profit. Eventually, the whole thing collapsed, and the organizers vanished. I reached out to a friend who worked in blockchain security. He reviewed what little information I had and confirmed my worst fears. This was a classic pyramid scheme dressed up with crypto buzzwords. There was no real mining operation, no legitimate business, just a scam designed to prey on people who wanted to believe they had found easy money. I gathered screenshots, saved articles, and prepared to show Lindsay the truth. That evening, I sat her down at the kitchen table. I walked through everything I had found, showing her the evidence piece by piece. She listened at first, but I could see her shutting down. When I finished, she said I was being paranoid, that her father would never put us in danger. I pointed out the red flags, the lack of transparency, the unrealistic returns, the pressure tactics. She countered that Brian had already made money. I explained how pyramid schemes worked, how early participants got paid to create credibility. The argument escalated. Lindsay started crying, asking why I could not just trust her family. I tried to explain that this was not about trust. It was about recognizing a scam, but she would not hear it. She accused me of being stubborn and closed-minded. That night she slept on the couch. The distance between us was no longer just emotional, it was physical. The next day, Diane called Lindsay. I was not supposed to hear, but our apartment was small. Diane told her that I was being controlling, that a good husband would support his wife's family. Lindsay did not defend me. She just agreed quietly and said she understood. My heart sank. A week later, Brian drove down from Seattle and met Lindsay at a coffee shop. She did not tell me about it until after. When she came home, she was cold in a way I had never experienced. She said Brian told her I was holding her back from opportunities, that I did not understand how investments worked. I tried once more to explain the situation, but she had already made up her mind. She believed her family, not me. Then Frank called my phone directly. His voice was aggressive, almost threatening. He said I was making his daughter unhappy, and that a real man would support his wife's family. I stayed calm and told him I would not invest in something I believed was fraudulent. He replied that if I was not willing to help, then I was not really part of their family. The call ended and I sat in silence, realizing how deep this manipulation ran. At the end of December, Frank showed up again without warning. Lindsay had given him a key to our apartment. He walked in like he owned the place and demanded we sit down for a man-to-man conversation. He made his pitch official this time. He wanted a $50,000 loan from our house savings. He promised to pay it back with interest once his returns started rolling in. I refused immediately, saying that money represented years of hard work and discipline. It was for our future, not for gambling on a scheme that screamed fraud from every angle. Frank raised his voice, saying I was destroying his daughter's relationship with her family. Lindsay stood nearby, silent. I turned to her and asked directly if this was what she wanted, if she wanted me to hand over our savings to her father. She looked at the floor and said she wanted me to support her family when they needed help. I told her this was not help. This was enabling something dangerous. Frank issued an ultimatum. Lindsay had to choose, them or me. She said she needed time to think, but I already knew what her answer would be. 2 days later, Lindsay told me she thought I should move out for a while. The words hit me like a punch. I asked if she was really choosing them over our marriage. She cried as she said she could not turn her back on her family, that they had always been there for her. I asked, what about us? What about the vows we made? She said maybe we had rushed into marriage, that maybe we were not as compatible as we thought. I realized in that moment there was nothing left to fight for. I could not compete with years of family loyalty and manipulation. I made one last attempt, telling her that if she went through with this, there would be no coming back. She said she knew. She said she was sorry. I packed a single suitcase and checked into a hotel that night. Sitting on the hotel bed, I felt devastated. But as the hours passed and the initial shock wore off, something inside me shifted. I started thinking clearly, strategically. The next morning, I called a divorce attorney and scheduled a consultation. During the meeting, I learned that while joint assets would be split, anything I had purchased individually before or during the marriage was legally mine as long as I could prove it. I went home to our apartment while Lindsay was at work and started going through receipts, credit card statements, and purchase records. Almost everything in that apartment had been bought by me. The couch, the dining table and chairs, the bed and dresser. Every kitchen appliance, from the coffee maker to the pots and pans, the television and sound system, even most of the decorations and artwork. Lindsay had contributed to rent and utilities, but she had not purchased much of anything tangible. A plan formed in my mind. If she wanted to choose her family over me, then she would live with the consequences of that choice. I found a new apartment, signed the lease, and hired a moving company. Over the next 2 weeks, I stayed silent. I sent Lindsay only brief text messages about logistics, nothing emotional. She assumed I was cooling off, that I would eventually come back once I calmed down. She had no idea what was coming. On a Tuesday morning, when I knew Lindsay would be at work all day, I met the movers at our old apartment. We worked systematically loading everything I had purchased onto the truck. The couch where we used to watch movies together. The dining table where we ate breakfast every morning. The bed we had shared for 4 years. Kitchen appliances, electronics, furniture decorations. Everything that was mine. Within 4 hours, the apartment was almost entirely empty. All that remained was an old folding table Lindsay had brought from her parents' house years ago and a single chair. Her clothes and personal items sat untouched in the bedroom closet. On the folding table, I placed a large envelope. Inside was an itemized list of everything I had taken, complete with scanned copies of receipts proving ownership. I included a brief letter. I kept it factual, not bitter. I wrote that she had chosen her family, and I respected that decision. Everything I had purchased was my property, and I had taken what belonged to me. I provided contact information for my divorce attorney. I explained that I had paid my portion of the remaining lease. I wished her well, but made it clear I would not be part of a relationship where I was not the priority. I also included divorce papers. I had already filed. 3 days later, Lindsay came home from work. I was not there to see it, but I imagined the moment clearly. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The echo of her footsteps would have been the first thing she noticed. Then, the sight of bare walls and empty space. Just the folding table in the middle of the room, with the envelope waiting. She called my phone. I had blocked her number. She sent text messages. They did not deliver. She tried email. My out-of-office reply said I was unavailable. She must have panicked, then standing in that hollow apartment realizing I was gone for good. She called Frank. He and Diane drove down immediately. When they saw what I had done, Diane apparently screamed that it was illegal, that they would sue me. But Frank, the former salesman, read through the documents I left. He knew I was within my legal rights. Everything I took I could prove I had purchased. There was nothing they could do. Lindsay could not afford the rent on her own. Not with an empty apartment she would need to refurnish. She had to break the lease and lost the security deposit we had put down together. With nowhere else to go, she moved back to Seattle to live with her parents. She quit her job in Portland, the career she had worked hard to build. Her relationship with Frank and Diane became strained. They had wanted her to choose family, but now they had to support their adult daughter who had lost everything. Brian stopped coming around as much. I think he felt guilty about the role he played. Lindsay tried desperately to contact me through mutual friends, but I had told them all in advance not to share any information about me. She showed up at my office once. I had already informed building security. They did not let her pass the lobby. She sent a letter through her own attorney. Mine responded with a form letter stating I would only communicate through legal channels about the divorce. 2 months after I left, Titan Crypto collapsed. The website went dark overnight. The founders disappeared. Frank lost the $15,000 he had invested. Brian lost $8,000. All those profits they had bragged about were never real. They could not withdraw a single penny. It was exactly the scam I had warned them about. Lindsay was devastated, not just about the money, but about what it represented. I had been right. Her family had manipulated her into making a choice that cost her everything: her marriage, her career, her independence, her self-respect. The divorce was finalized quietly a few weeks later. She had to start her entire life over from scratch. 6 months passed. I moved into a smaller apartment, but it felt more like home than anywhere I had lived with Lindsay. I decorated it my way, minimalist and modern without compromise. Work became a refuge. I focused entirely on my projects and earned a promotion to senior software engineer. The extra income felt good not because of the money itself, but because it represented my ability to move forward. I picked up old hobbies I had abandoned during the marriage. I joined a running club and met people who had no connection to my past. On weekends, I drove out to the Columbia River Gorge and hiked trails I had once walked with Lindsay, reclaiming those places as my own. I started therapy to process everything that had happened. I did not want to carry bitterness or anger. I just wanted to understand, to learn, and to heal. I was not bitter. I did not hate Lindsay or her family. I just accepted that they had shown me who they were, and I had chosen to believe them. I started dating casually, not looking for anything serious. I reconnected with my own family, spending more time with my parents and younger sister. My financial goals were back on track. I was saving for a house again, this time entirely on my own terms. Then one afternoon an email appeared in my inbox. The subject line read, "I owe you an apology." It was from Lindsay. She wrote several paragraphs honest and raw, in a way she had never been before. She admitted her mistakes. She described how her family had manipulated her, how she had been blind to it until everything fell apart. She said she had cut financial ties with her parents and was working in Seattle trying to rebuild her life from nothing. She asked if we could meet just once for closure. I thought about it for several days. Part of me wanted to ignore the message and keep moving forward. But another part of me recognized that closure might help both of us. I agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Tacoma, halfway between Portland and Seattle. When I saw her, I barely recognized her. She looked different, more real somehow. The polished version of herself she used to project was gone. She seemed tired, but also more mature. We sat down and she apologized, without making excuses. She owned every mistake. She told me about the aftermath. Her relationship with her parents was strained. They had lost money and credibility, and having their daughter back home was a constant reminder of their failure. She had learned the hard way that family loyalty did not mean blind obedience. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I told her the truth. I did not hate her. I did not resent her, but I also could not reconcile with her. The trust we once had was broken in a way that could never be repaired. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and said she understood. She was not asking to get back together. She just wanted me to know she had learned from this, that she had grown. We finished our coffee and walked to the parking lot together. We said goodbye this time, truly and finally. As I drove back to Portland, I felt lighter than I had in months. I reflected on everything that had happened. Marriage required putting your spouse first. Family could offer love and support, but they could not be allowed to manipulate or control. Walking away was not weakness. It was strength. Self-respect mattered more than keeping the peace. I thought about that empty apartment I had left behind. It was not revenge. It was a lesson about consequences. Lindsay had to feel that emptiness to understand what she had lost. She had chosen her family's delusions over our reality, and I had refused to enable that choice. I did not regret our marriage because it taught me what I needed to know about boundaries, about values, about the kind of partner I deserved. Looking forward, I understood that love alone was not enough. You needed shared values, mutual respect, healthy boundaries, the willingness to put each other first. Lindsay and I had some of those things, but not all of them. And without all of them, a marriage could not survive. I did not know what the future held. Maybe I would meet someone who understood what it meant to be a true partner. Maybe I would stay single and continue building a life I was proud of. Either way, I was okay. I had walked away from someone I loved because staying would have destroyed me. And I had learned that sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do. So let me ask you this. Have you ever had to choose between someone you loved and your own self-respect? What did you do? Drop a comment below and share your story. If this resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about tough choices and personal growth. Share this with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that you deserve to be a priority, not an option. Take care of yourself, and remember that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the best outcomes.